I'm Janelle Manos, business reporter with the Boston Globe, and this is Bold Types, conversations with Boston's business leaders. Today we're talking with Tracy Chang, owner of Pagu Restaurant in Cambridge. It has been a tumultuous year for the restaurant industry for sure, and you have been on the front lines in so many various ways, trying to help frontline workers, trying to help your staff, and trying to keep your own business afloat while you're also expanding your family. Tell us a little bit about Pagu and what it means to you as a restaurant, but also as really a place within a community that can support the people that eat here, but also work here and beyond.
Pre-pandemic, Pagu was a Spanish-Japanese tapas restaurant, and we always believed that our core tenets were food, community, and collaboration. That really, evolved during COVID in ways that I never really expected. We are still feeding people, but it's really changed to feeding people who need to eat, not just people who want to eat.
One of the things I know you worked on with a few other people was coming up with guidelines really early on for how to continue operating food service in a way that could comply with coronavirus and what we knew about it at the time.
So all these friends just kind of gathering their information, other folks locally like Lori Lander, Eric Lander, talking with them, and just a simple Google document and putting together what other folks were using, like, hey, can we take temperatures when employees are coming in?
Tell me a little bit more about how you went from developing protocols to help people stay safe in restaurants to realizing that you could actually start serving again in a different capacity with Off Their Plate, which was the nonprofit you created to help frontline workers.
We had already been in touch with one of our regulars. She is Natalie Guo, who is a medical student at the time, and she was doing her rotations in the hospitals and noticing that there was this opportunity to feed frontline healthcare workers and at the same time help restaurants. We just said, let's prototype, let's run a pilot.
So I felt like I remember watching as Off Their Plate really took off, particularly here in Boston, but soon throughout the country. Talk a little bit about the momentum that had at that moment.
Being in touch with Natalie as well as with Ken Oranger, other local chefs like Jody Adams, and also just chefs nationwide. We surveyed these restaurants to understand their need so that we could bring on the most vulnerable restaurants in certain instances, owned and operated by women, people of color, and just understanding that for them it was a lifeline.
Talk with me a little bit about the sort of origin of Project Restore Us and who it was serving and how that obviously differs from frontline workers in this instance.
A friend of a friend was looking to buy flour, and at that time everyone was baking. And so this friend of a friend, Marina, became a very good friend because she was looking for flour. She said, let's build a Pagu market and we can feed people who are looking to purchase groceries safely. Yeah. And then very quickly that evolved into, wait, what about your employees? What about their communities? What about people in Chelsea and Revere and Dorchester? And we would see people outside waiting in lines at the food banks. Yeah. And I took her to one of the drop-offs with World Central Kitchen to the Revere High School, which turned into a food bank. And so we're like, okay, what if we did something like that? But okay, what if we deliver it door to door? So it became Project Restore Us.
About the connection between Pagu and May.
Yeah, so Yuri and Anil own May's, and when I found out that there was a Thai restaurant opening just around the corner from us, I was just so excited to eat Thai food all the time. And as I've gotten to know them, we've just been comparing our notes about COVID, about business, and it just seemed like an easy question, easy answer when we were looking for restaurant partners to participate in Project Restore Us.
So what are some things that people are getting in each of the grocery boxes at this point in time?
Yeah, so 25 pounds of jasmine rice, 25 pounds of black beans, a whole box of produce that is usually around 40 pounds. So they could get 90 pounds of food at one time. In those boxes, it really depends on their dietary restrictions or the cultural sensitivity. So for the Vietnamese box, it's going to look different than the Latinx box and will look different than the Chinese box for Chinese Progressive Association. Yeah, we've really developed these kind of close ties with these families because some of them, they have my cell phone number. And, if they keep like the checks and balances. If like the bok choy doesn't look very good that week, they will tell us.
How did your team respond to this change in protocol and sort of a completely new way of functioning as a restaurant over the last year or so?
For them, not only helping us pack, the groceries pretty much for their neighbors, right? But also being a part of that delivery, right? Like seeing it from start to finish and really interacting with someone receiving the groceries and just, seeing their smile behind the mask. I think for them, they get it. And I think that's why, they want to still work here after all this time.
How did you first fall in love with food and know it was going to be the sort of creative endeavor you wanted to pursue for your career?
At one point, it was a childhood and childish dream, right? Like my grandmother had a restaurant when I was growing up, and I would scoop green tea ice cream, right? And so I was like, oh, I love scooping green tea ice cream. That's what running a restaurant is all about. But a lot of it was, like guest interaction or interaction with the employees at the restaurant. I enjoyed those moments, and I figured maybe one day I could build something like that as an adult, right? And that I could scoop green tea ice cream and make Shirley Temples again, right?
If only it was that simple. I'm curious if you intend to continue some of this community work, even as you get fully open, thinking about having people indoors, outdoors, whatever it is.
I think to continue it is necessary. These communities will continue to feel the impacts of COVID even after COVID is over.
You've also been speaking out about the attacks in the Asian American community and on the issue of Stop Asian Hate. Talk to me a little bit about that decision.
Being born here, being born Chinese, Taiwanese American, I was always taught to not really speak up if something happened. It's better to, avoid conflict than to stir and cause more trouble. I opened this restaurant before I turned 30, and there were plenty of instances, during construction, during negotiations, during, all the pieces and all the processes that you have to do to get a restaurant open, where I was like, oh, is this just happening to me because, I'm Chinese or because I'm 20-something or because I'm female. And I would just brush it off and say, okay, just keep going. You just become kind of hardened to it over time. This has happened to us before. My grandmother owned a restaurant, and this was a time where restaurants operated mostly in cash. And so she was targeted, she was followed home. She and my grandfather, in separate instances, they were beaten, they were tied up, and they were robbed in their homes. And these were in communities like Lexington and Winchester, which, you would expect to be safe. And what did we do, right? Like, we didn't go on the news, we didn't cause any trouble. These acts of violence, they're not okay. We do need to bring it to the forefront, and we do need to, just come together with our community members, who are black, who are white, who are yellow, who are brown, all the colors, and be in solidarity. I guess cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation, how does this tie into this world of food? People ask if it's okay that restaurants that are not owned by Asian folks are preparing Asian foods. You know, there are ways to appreciate the foods of other cultures. I make Spanish and Japanese food here. I am Taiwanese American.
Yeah.
There are ways to respect the culture, respect the food, respect the people. And if you are profiting off of it, to do what you can to support those people.
We call this series Bold Types. You've been remarkably bold over this past year as you've had to pivot your business in so many ways. Tell me a little bit about how you've managed to have the bravery and boldness to know that that was the right decision.
To be bold, to be brave. I think my parents just, you know, kind of lied to me and raised me that way. I played sports growing up. I was very competitive, and now I feel less competitive now, but I definitely still feel like the tenacity and the, just like the resilience. And I think that comes from, having bold parents who immigrated here, having bold grandparents who knew nothing about, starting a restaurant and decided to start a restaurant. So I guess my bold move is having gone backwards to go forwards in terms of choosing to open a restaurant when everyone said, "What the heck are you doing? You have a degree in finance." I had the privilege of choice, and I chose to open a restaurant. And for better or for worse, here we are. And this restaurant and this community has really transformed me in the past year in ways that I never would have anticipated when opening a restaurant.